Hello, guys and gals, and this is another episode of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. This should be episode number 30. And we are 14 stories in of 26, so we are halfway through at least. Anyways, let's go over the copyright information real quick. That's the most important part of all. Clearly says Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and all rights are reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company Incorporated, a Random House company, and the address is there. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited. Printed and bound in the United States of America, and the Library of Congress information is right there if you are interested in that. In the last part, we started reading Two Live Ghosts, which is, and we met Jeff and Hank, and they are witnessing some kind of Native American council meeting where they are summoning the ghosts of the dead to find out how they died, which is really, really fascinating. We're going to go back a little ways, and we're going to go back to this. Suddenly, the figure of the bear was gone, and the tent flap fell. The muffled voice of the medicine man called anew. Summon your friends, those who died in battle, those who heard me promise they would return. There were calls from the council fire. Nihawatis, Tahiska. Then, as the brief flare subsided, voices spoke again, seemingly from the top of the tent. One was a long wail, "I am Nihawatis," and the other came in a booming voice, "I am Tahishka." While the two voices were telling how they had died in battle, Jeff whispered to Hank, "Nihawatis sounds like Cheyenne for wolf on the hill. But Tahiska is a new one on me." "It should be," chuckled Hank. "It means white buffalo, the Sioux idea of something nobody would ever see, like a purple cow." Right then, Hank and Jeff were seeing the white wolf, for the tent flap had opened again, and the figure representing the spirit of Nihawatis was doing a dance. It dropped away, and to Hank's amazement, the white buffalo came next, thrusting its horned head from the blackness and repeating in a hollow tone, "I am Tahishka." Then, as the chieftains dumped more pine cones on the fire, the huge head bobbed away from the sudden glare, letting the tent flap drop again. Considering the hides and costumes they had seen in the teepee, Jeff and Hank were sure the medicine man had gotten loose and was staging a masquerade. Evidently, the Indian chiefs were skeptical too, for with one accord they rushed the teepee, whipping wide the flap and revealing the whole interior in the glow of the firelight. Awed, they fell back in amazement, and from their vantage point, Jeff and Hank saw the reason why. The medicine man, who called himself Mukana, was laying face down, completely exhausted from his struggle with the thongs, and was as tightly bound as ever. All the costumes and other implements were stacked in their proper places, except as Jeff and Hank had seen exactly as Jeff and Hank had seen them. Apparently, the chiefs knew all about them, for they made the rounds and came from the teepee, shaking their heads as though really puzzled. As soon as the tent flap dropped, more manifestations began. First came the excited voice of the medicine man, babbling in new frenzy. "Your friends, the departed warriors, are still here, even though you cannot see them. Matochinga, Nihawatis, Tehishka, and many more, all here. You cannot see them, but you can hear them. Listen. From within the teepee came the beat of drums, the clack of turtle shells, the thud of stones against the leathery walls, followed by a chorus of blood-curdling war whoops that froze Jeff and Hank where they crouched. But such sounds were familiar to the assembled chieftains. They took them as a token of welcome. Again, they sprang into the haunted teepee, flinging its curtained front wide. They were met with flying drums, shells, and stones that showered from above. Some of the chieftains actually reeled as though meeting invisible attackers. But through it all, the medicine man lay bound and helpless as before. Again, the Native Americans emerged, dropping the tent flap. Then, as a parting manifestation, strange voices mingled near the tent top, followed by fiery sparks that issued from the opening like a miniature volcano. Again, the teepee was shaken violently, and the figure of the bound medicine man was flung from within, carrying the curtained tent front with him, as he landed bewildered beside the council fire. In response to the medicine man's moans, the chieftains cut him loose, and he came to his feet, weakly at first. Then, at full strength, suddenly returning, he gestured to the empty tent, waving his hand toward the top and pointing off beyond the low hills that showed plainly in the moonlight. You saw them, he announced. You heard them. And now they have gone. Those warriors who returned from battle, as I promised. Now I, Numo Kumakana, shall follow them to the happy hills. But soon you too will be going to battle. To all of you who see me standing here and watch me lift my hands, the medicine man stretched both hands high as he spoke. To everyone who hears my voice and marks my words, I promise this. After the next battle, all of you will return here. Some of you will be living to serve as witnesses to the presence of the others, who will come back as ghosts of the dead. I, Numo Kumokama, have spoken. Now I shall go, but I shall be here when you again assemble, ready to summon the missing warriors and send them on their way, as I have done tonight. Again, you may bind me, yet you will see the impossible happen through the power of Wakancheka, who conquers Wakantanka. With that, the painted medicine man turned and strode away in the direction he had pointed, following the unseen spirits to the land where they had gone. There was nothing ghostly in his parting. He simply crossed the little hillock and dipped from sight in the uncertain moonlight. But he left a solemn group of chieftains beside the dwindling council fire. They waited silently, as though expecting more to happen. Then, with one accord, they went to their horses, mounted, and galloped off. After the hoofbeats faded, Jeff and Hank sneaked forward to the teepee. They skirted the dying fire, so their figures could not be seen, and on the way, Hank picked up a few pine cones. From near the teepee, he muttered, "Wait," and as Jeff complied, Hank tossed the cones into the embers. As the flare came, the bearded partners converged upon the open tent front and dove in with drawn knives, flinging aside hides and masks, stabbing all about and even upward in case any lurkers might try to spring upon them. But their blades found only nothingness. They were alone except for their own shadows, which were as black as Hank's beard, shadows cast by the firelight that Jeff's beard matched in ruddiness. Hank's disappointed snarl ended in a short laugh. Guess there was nobody in here nohow, Hank decided. Leastwise, nobody except the medicine man. Hank stalked out, stooping by the fire and picking up the cut thongs that still lay there. A smart geezer, that medicine man, smart enough to slip of the out of these rawhide strips and go cavorting all around the tent. Smart to have those dumb chiefs cut him loose later so they wouldn't find the slack. Hank handed the thongs to Jeff, who matched the cut ends in an effort to gauge the size of the loops. Maybe he could have slipped them, conceded Jeff, but how could he have managed to do all those things all alone and all at once? What do you mean, all at once? Demanded Hank. First, he was dancing around in a bearskin, playing he was Matachinga. Then later, he was that hill wolf, whatever the Cheyenne call it. He used the wolf skin for that. And all of a sudden, put in Jeff, he was Tahishka, the white buffalo. How do you explain that? Easy. He threw off the wolf skin this way. Hank swept his arm wide, grabbed up a buffalo head, stooped. He brought his hands together and pulled it down over his head so his voice sounded like this. Hank came erect, and his hands moved downward to his shoulders, and his voice took on a hollow tone, which brought a smile from Jeff. A good imitation, he approved, except that the only buffalo heads in the teepee are all black. Go and look. Hank went and looked. When he returned, he was stroking his beard in puzzled fashion, the way Jeff usually did. It was Jeff who inquired, See any white buffalo heads? No white ones. Hank stooped suddenly beside the fire and brought up a handful of gray ashes like a soft powder, which he trickled from one hand to the other. Maybe the medicine man used some stuff like this, white ashes sprinkled over black mask to make it look white. He could have shaken it when he took it off. Hank went through the motions, and the stuff would all be gone. If he used ashes, some of it would have been left. It wouldn't have to be ashes. Maybe it was some special stuff. Jeff, those medicine men know a lot of tricks. Like climbing to the top of the teepee and talking from there while you still hear him moaning down below. That's what they call ventriloquism. Wait now, Hank. I've seen ventriloquists. They talk without moving their lips, while you watch a wooden dummy open and close its mouth. So it looks like it was doing the talking. But this medicine man wasn't using any dummy. So what? He just threw his voice up to the tent top. But I've just explained that ventriloquists can't throw their voices. The act won't work without a dummy. Hank shook his head at that. You've seen the wrong ventriloquists, Jeff, he said. When I was in Washington driving wagons during the war, a fellow named Wyman, the Wizard, came there soon after one of those Bull Run battles. I don't remember just which one. Anyways, this Wyman could throw his voice into a trunk or up to the top of the theater or even down under the stage. Maybe you just imagined it, but he did it. Like this medicine man in this here teepee. Hank gestured to the teepee, which was fully dark again, for the fire had subsided and clouds were obscuring the moonlight. Jeff went over and tried to shake the teepee without results. You may be right about those things, Hank, Jeff conceded. Loose thongs, bearskin, buffalo mask, white powder, and ventriloquism. But what about the teepee? But what made the teepee shake? Hank shoved his weight against the other side, but the teepee did not budge. The wind was rising, and even the tall grass was waving. The tent poles groaned, but the leathery sides flapped as before. Yet the teepee did not quiver, let alone rock. Another trick, grunted Hank. The tent was moored tight when we first came in, so the medicine man must have found a way to loosen it, then he fixed it right again at the finish. Right smart of him, decided Jeff, to do so much in so little time and leave us baffled like we are now. If I had time, Hank declared, I could figure out this contraption. But from the way it's clouding up, we'd better be going back to the canyon. Let's go. It was pitch black when they reached the canyon, and they would have lost their way if the mules hadn't heard them and brayed a welcome. There was no use trying to go on, so they camped there for the night. With morning, the sky cleared again, and they continued on their way. First, we'll locate that village, Hank decided. Then we can find the army and tell them where it is. Later on, we can go back and look for the medicine lodge and find out what makes it tick. They worked their way through rolling country, pausing at intervals, while one man would stay with the mules and the other would creep to the summit of a grassy knoll to look for the Native American village. It was well along in the afternoon when Hank came back from such a trip and gave Jeff the grim facts. The village is down in the next village, Hank reported, and it's a big one, running for miles along a river. We'd better spread the word right quick. Hank's decision came too late. By the time he and Jeff were skirting the end of the high ridge, they heard a distant bugle call and looked up to see a troop of cavalrymen dismounting from their horses and opening fire at an enemy somewhere beyond. They looked the other way. Hank and Jeff saw a band of Native Americans riding up from the deep ravine, as though to flank the ridge. Being directly in the path, the bearded prospectors hurried up the slope, practically dragging the mules along. Halfway there, they were met by a dozen troopers who came galloping down from the ridge and dismounted as they arrived. The soldiers were commanded by a sergeant who included Hank and Jeff in his sharply barked orders. Get those mules back behind the rise with the horses. Then up to the firing line, everyone. The troopers were shooting with their carbines when Hank and Jeff joined them. The two rifles proved helpful in stemming the attacking Native Americans who spilled from their saddles and disappeared in the long grass at every volley. Soon dozens of riderless horses were racing down into the ravine, but new squads of Native Americans came surging up to replace the fallen braves. Between volleys, Hank shouted to the sergeant close by, "You better be getting your men up to the brow of the hill. They can't take this much longer." "They won't have to," the sergeant called back. "All we need to do is hold our ground. The general himself is in command, and he's handled plenty of hostiles in his time." There was an interruption while guns cracked at another surge of foolhardy Native Americans. Another half dozen tumbled into the grass while the horses scattered wildly. Following that, the sergeant picked up from where he had left off. By now, the general is busting up their main forces, chopping it into bits the way he always does. Next, he'll be fanning out his command, and they'll be coming this way to support us. You wait and see. But there were still more Native Americans down below, urged Hank. Look how they are outflanking us. You think so? Suppose I told you that we have another whole troop coming over from the next ridge to outflank them. What would you say to that? I'd say that they'd better come right quick, Hank turned to Jeff. What would you say, partner? I'd say let's start shooting again right now, snapped Jeff. Here they come, the biggest batch yet. Carbines and rifles blazed point blank at some 50 Native American horsemen who divided rapidly to get out of range, the riders swinging from sight on the far side of their mounts. Like the soldiers, Jeff and Hank followed the diverging horsemen with their guns, hoping to pick off a few. While they were thus diverted, Native Americans sprang up from the tall grass just in front of them and came whooping forward, another 50 of them, some with rifles and some branching knives and tomahawks. These were the braves who had fallen earlier. Some actually had been hit, but they were comparatively few. The rest had purposefully dived ahead of the rifle fire, knowing that the grass was high enough to hide them. All this while, they had been snaking forward, ready for the signal to attack. The moment had come, and the lurking Native Americans were about to overwhelm their foe. Jeff and Hank weren't the sort to give up easily. They intended to hold out until the promised reserves arrived. Jeff shot down 2 attackers, used his empty rifle as a club, to club a third. Then, looking to see how Hank was faring, the man with the black beard was slashing at 2 Indians with his Bowie knife, but a third was aiming at him with a rifle. As Jeff shouted a warning, Hank himself gave a frantic wave and pointed past past his red-bearded friend. Jeff swung about and warded with his rifle just as a Native American, swung a tomahawk straight at his skull. There was time to divert the stroke even though Jeff couldn't stop it. The hatchet turned in the Indian's hand, and the side, not the blade, crashed hard against Jeff's head. His slouch hat took some of the blow, but not enough. His whole head seemed to absorb one tremendous jolt and ended up in a burst of stars and a mass of utter blackness. Blackness still persisted when Jeff again opened his eyes, only now it was distant and velvety. The stars had returned, but they were not the bursting kind. Instead, they sprinkled the black canopy overhead and furnished a twinkling glow. Lying on the grassy ridge, Jeff was staring up at the night sky, slowly recalling how he had come to be here. Once he had pieced the past, Jeff came to his feet without great effort and rubbed his head and looked about. Except for a slight throb, he felt no after effects from the blow that had felled him. But the others had not fared so well. The army sergeant and the soldiers of his squad were sprawled in grotesque positions, all slain in that final onslaught. Jeff's thoughts flashed back to Hank, but before he could call his partner's name, a figure rose slowly from among the dead. Face to face, the 2 prospectors grinned silently at each other through their beards, offering sober congratulations over their mutual escape. Jeff spoke first. "Lucky for me that you pointed when you did, Hank. I just had time to slow that tomahawk. I guess the Sioux that swung it must have thought he killed me and kept on going after someone else. Anyways, I'm still here." "So am I," returned Hank. "Thanks to you, Jeff. You pointed too, remember? I turned and saw a rifle muzzle coming square at me. I grabbed it, and the brave missed when he fired, but he managed to clout me with it." Hank rubbed his forehead ruefully, and that was the last I remember. "I guess one of the soldiers plugged the Native Americans, or he'd have done me in for sure." A night fog was creeping slowly up the ridge, and the moon, rising just above the brow, gave the whole scene a weird effect in the swirling mist. The figures of the fallen soldiers seemed to stir, as though ready to rise up as living ghosts. "We'd better mosey along," Hank decided. He glanced over the slight rise and added, "Horses gone, mules gone, packs gone. Guess the Native Americans must have taken them, which is why they didn't come back to bother us. And by now, the main forces of cavalry has caught up with them," Jeff said. "That's the end of those Native Americans." "Yeah, but they're more on the warpath. We'd better find that cavalry brigade and tell them. Whoever the general is, we'll report to him in person." Good enough, Hank. We can take a look at the Indian village on the way and tell him about that too." Without the mules, the bearded partners found hiking easy despite the long grass. They reached a knoll where the mist had lessened and saw the village spread distant in the moonlight. Many clusters of wigwams were uh, clearly etched in the glow of huge council fires, where Native Americans were dancing about, waving tomahawks and war clubs. The army must have driven them right back to their wigwams, chuckled Hank. Now they're getting all fired up to go out and get licked again tomorrow, unless the army attacks them sooner. There's too many for the army to attack at once, argued Jeff. That gives me an idea, Hank. Let us go back to the medicine lodge and be there when the chiefs show up again. And then what? Then we can steer the cavalry there. Even a small detachment like the sergeant had would be enough to chase those chiefs and capture them. Without their leaders, the tribes will be as good as licked. Okay, we're almost done. You hit it square, Jeff. Let's go. By dawn, they were back at the canyon, and all that day they watched for the approach of army scouts or cavalry detachments, but none appeared. They also kept an occasional eye on the lone teepee in the hidden valley, and along toward dusk, Jeff came up with a new suggestion. Let's get into that teepee before those chiefs show up. If the army isn't here to chase them, maybe we can do it ourselves. We'll start yelling and tossing things around before the medicine man can even begin to work himself loose. With two of us, we can do it a whole lot better than he ever could. And suppose, objected Jeff, the chiefs start to search the teepee beforehand. What if they find us there? They didn't search it the last time, not until after the commotion started. Then they were too scared to know what to look for. This time, they'll be even more scared. Maybe, but what about the medicine man? He'll be the most scared of the lot. The things happening all around him before he can fake a ghost act of his own. When he gets loose, he will run like blazes, and the rest will follow. You're right, Jeff. You're right, Jeff, anyway. I intend to have another look inside that teepee, and this may be just the time to do it. Soon they were in the teepee, picking out what they wanted, along with the bear skin and the buffalo heads. They also found a pair of grotesque devil masks, which Jeff was trying. While Jeff was trying on the mask, Hank began shoving at one of the slanted tent poles, and suddenly exclaimed, Look at Jeff! The whole thing gives, and you can rock the tent you can rock the whole tent with it. Try that pole on your side. Jeff tried it and found that Hank was right. What a couple of dumbheads we were, Jeff laughed. When we tried to rock the tent from the outside, we couldn't because the poles were tilted inward and we were pushing downward and throwing ourselves off balance. But from the inside, heaving outward, you can bring the other side right up. So now we know, agreed Hank. And once we start the tent rocking, we can grab some of those hanging straps and go up with them. Now let's dig around and see what else we can find. They dug around. They dug among the buffalo hides and came up with a fair-sized powder keg that proved to be nearly full. That brought a chuckle from Hank. Remember those sparks that shot from the top of the tent that night? He said, This is the stuff that makes them. Find me some chunks of paper, Jeff, and I'll rig some fireworks like they'll be showing at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia this summer. Jeff found some paper along with a flint and steel, which he used to ignite some short candles. For by now, darkness was thick inside the teepee. By the time Hank was through preparing his pyrotechnics, Jeff's keen ear caught the faint thud of approaching hoofbeats. The bearded pair snuffed out the candles and had burrowed deep in the buffalo hides by the time the chieftains arrived and began to build the council fire. Soon the babble of voices announced the approach of the medicine man, who began his speech in the tone of Numo Numo Numokama Numomakama, but this time with a note of triumph. Tonight you have all returned among the living, so there are none whom I must summon, as I did before. None like Madochiga, Neowatis, and Tahishka, those who have already gone to the happy hills. But again you may bind me, so that you may witness the power of Wakancheka, which will drive away Wakantanka by Kochika and Wagamu. Um, Chunkika and Wakamu, Jeff translated in undertone. That means drum and rattle. Get ready with the tom-tom and the turtle shell. They're all set, Hank assured him, but first we rock the tent like the other night, then the drum and rattle. And after that, we'll put on those grotesque masks we found. Why did this not work? Okay, we went way over. Sorry about that. We have been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone. If you like this content, we've been specifically reading Two Live Ghosts. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, we have been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgivable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter P. Gibson. And so, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.